could not fall asleep. Just the old racing mind. You ever get that? Just the racing mind. Just, and not like even about anything in particular, but just, yeah. Oh, well, Thursday's not the weekend, but yeah. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah. Well, I hope today is a better day. I hope today is good for all of us. But I got to get to bed tonight. Well, that's fun. So yesterday or Friday, we started talking about biology. We said biology is a study of living things, and we said really when you get into that, it's a really complicated thing to study, right? We are in this big universe, and we don't know how much living stuff is in the universe. We've never seen anything but what's on Earth. And Earth is just this one tiny, 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 tiny little corner of a really big universe. Yeah, well, exactly, right? And so we talked a little bit about like why Earth? What makes Earth a good place? Why is stuff living here and not, say, on Mars or on Venus or on the moon? And we talked about some of the things that make Earth suitable for life. And then we said, well, what makes something alive? And you guys came up with all these. These are all good. Made of cells, uses energy, consumes oxygen. I added that we call that respiration and other nutrients. Has a life cycle, right? Is born, grows, dies, reproduces, passes its information on, right? Like our offspring aren't just totally random. They are like related to us. We give them the information to become what they are. You are not just, in fact, some of you aren't even raised by your biological parents, right? I mean, some people, I was raised by my biological parents, but then like my niece lives with us and I'm not her parent, right? But I raised her. But the point being, you still have a connection to your biological parents because you carry their genetic information. You're going to share some traits with them. Yeah. And of course, you're also, that doesn't determine everything. And then we kind of looked at how long this took. We said Earth's about 4.6 billion years old. And that for the first almost billion years, there's no evidence that there was anything alive on Earth. And then all of a sudden life shows up. And for a really, really, really long time, that life is very simple, just individual cells that can kind of float around. And then all of a sudden, we get the appearance of cells working together, of what we call multicellular life. Does that make sense? And then that starts to ramp up quickly. We start to see plants, which are made of millions and trillions of cells, and animals, which are made of millions and billions of cells. And that even then we start with really simple plants and really simple animals. And as time goes on, we see more and more complex things. And of course, by the time we get to say 60 million years ago, 100 million years ago, we've got dinosaurs and these massive things walking around Earth. And then we have several mass extinctions in human history. But famously, at the end of the dinosaur era, we have something at the end of the Cretaceous period. We have this mass extinction where basically everything big on Earth dies and small animals start to grow and thrive. And that brings us to today. Yeah.
All right, two things.
Sure.
One, what are your thoughts about the pyramids? Like, how do you think they were created?
By people carrying rocks, and largely, as is usually the case.
Do you think that there was previous life?
No. I mean, no, there's no evidence for that. You're mentioning something. There's a famous book called Chariots of the Gods that was written by a guy named Eric von Daniken that was sort of big in the 70s and 80s. I read it when I was a kid.
It's in the library.
Yeah, but the truth is, no, we know how the pyramids were built. They were built by large groups of enslaved people working for very, very rich people who wanted to build a big building so that they could shove his body in it after he died. This is a real human thing where we're like, hey, rich people are going to get poor people to work for them for not a lot of money. In fact, in Egyptian culture in particular, when the pharaoh died, a lot of the people who worked for him were just also killed and then buried around him. Yeah, nice, right? Yeah. Yeah, and fair enough. But anyway. Yeah, be quick, okay? So I just want to say that on Friday, one of the things we mentioned was that all living things are made of cells. I'm going to say learn, but we didn't really learn that. We said it, but that's okay. I'm sorry I'm sitting, by the way, but I forgot to charge my computer, so I need to stay plugged in. As you know, I prefer to be up and about. Okay, so here's a question. What are cells?
Tiny little organizations.
Hmm.
But it could be bacteria.
Well, a bacteria is a cell, absolutely.
Little like bug things that move around and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, so these are different things that are cells, absolutely. Your cells, bacteria cells, everything that's alive is cells. So plant is made of cells, fungus, bacteria, all of them. But what's a cell? Well, you're not just one cell, because to make a person actually takes billions and billions and billions and billions of cells all working together. You are very complicated. And we're not going to start by talking about you because you're too complicated. We're going to start talking about real simple things. So what's a cell? Well, first of all, we can say this. Cells are very, very, very small. You need a microscope to see even the biggest ones. So just like a building is made up of a lot of smaller pieces, right? If you look at this building, it's a cinder block building, right? So it's made up of all these individual blocks of concrete. You are made up of a bunch of smaller pieces called cells, and they're very small indeed, so it takes a lot to make you. But keep in mind that some living things are just one cell. Not everything is a bunch of cells stuck together. Sometimes it's just one of them. But complex life, the stuff you can see around you, is all made of lots and lots of them. Trees are made of lots of cells. People are made of lots of cells. Your dog is made of lots of cells. So is your cat, if you have a cat. If I looked at a cell under a microscope, what would I see? What do they look like? Has anyone ever done that in one of your classes or an activity?
Like move around. Like sometimes they're kind of like little worms or little dots.
Yeah, some move around and some are still. The cells that make up like the woody part of a tree don't move around a lot, but your muscle cells do, and like bacteria move around. And yeah, some of them look circular, some of them look almost like, stretchy, like they're worm-shaped or something. But at the most fundamental, cells are little packages of living stuff. Now, if that sounds like a ridiculous definition, does that sound a little ridiculous? Yeah, but let me explain what I mean by that. What we really mean is that, I'm going to say this again in another way that's more scientific, and we'll kind of look at the two of them. Cells are composed of complex organic molecules. Oh boy. Enclosed in a flexible membrane. Oh boy. What the heck does that mean? I'll tell you what it means. Cells are little packages of living stuff. Okay, first of all, the term membrane isn't just a science term. I redid my roof the other year, and we put down a water membrane. Does anyone know what a membrane is? It's any thin material designed to separate or protect. The simplest example would be, think of a balloon. A balloon is a membrane. Now, in the case of a balloon, the membrane material is what? What are balloons made of?
Latex.
Yeah, usually, or rubber. Yeah, that's right. In the case of a membrane, it's made of something called cell membrane. And if you take grade 11 biology, and I hope you will, it's a great course, you'll learn what that's made of, like what it actually looks like. We don't need to know that for this course. Enough to know that there's this material that we call cell membrane that is very, very thin, that's very flexible, that surrounds the cell. So basically, you can think of a cell as a sort of water balloon with all of the stuff needed to be alive. I'm going to say required for life. Inside. Now in grade 11, when you learn about the membrane, you're going to learn that it's a really cool material. Imagine that if you wanted a bigger balloon, all you had to do was kind of like hold a bit more rubber up against it and it would grow. It would like absorb the rubber and get bigger. Wouldn't that be cool?
Kind of like in the movie Venom.
Yeah. If you think about it, it's how bubbles work, right? The problem with bubbles, right? Like if you blow a bubble bigger, it just keeps getting bigger. It'll just take more of that soap water, right? Now the problem with a bubble is that it's really delicate, right? It breaks really easily. But a cell membrane's...
Grade 1, we got to freeze a bubble.
That's really cool. That's actually really cool. I should do that. I've never done that.
And then I remember there was like 4 of us little kids in a fist fight over who got to break it. And I remember some kid ended up having to go to the hospital because somebody threw the bubble at his head and cut in his eye.
Damn.
Yeah. Bubbles can be hella dangerous. Watch out.
All right, so this whole thing here is a cell. And we're going to draw this a few times and make it a little bit more complex as we go. The first thing we need to understand about a cell is that whatever shape it is, and they're often kind of round in shape, and the simpler the cell, the more likely they are to just kind of be round.
They're like a puddle.
Is surrounded by a cell membrane. Now, I've drawn this in 2 dimensions, but really it's 3-dimensional. Again, you can think of it as being kind of like a balloon. And we said it's kind of like a water balloon, which is to say inside of every cell, they are filled with water. Even things that don't seem wet, right? Like you know, you can kind of get that your cells are filled with water because you seem kind of squishy, right? Like squishy-ish. And even like something like your muscle, which isn't as squishy, but even still, if you eat meat, right, you know that it's got lots of moisture in it, right? And as you cook the moisture out of it, we say it gets drier, right? We can understand that like every cell has water inside of it. Sometimes it's harder to get that sense. Like you think of like the wood in a tree, that's got water in it. And again, at first you're like, but it's really hard and tough. But then you think like, oh no, wood has to dry out. And you've probably all felt wood when it really dries out, right? If when you first break a branch off a tree, is it easy to break? It's squishy, right? It's kind of hard. And then if you come back and get that same branch 6 months later when it's been sitting on the forest floor, it'll break really easily, right? And it'll feel really dry. And that's because once it's dead, the water can slowly drain out of all its cells. So
that's why our skin decomposes.
all cells contain water. Now, it's not just pure water, all right? It's water and a bunch of stuff mixed in with it. And we'll talk a little bit about what all the mixed in with it is. But the fluid in a cell, and are you all comfortable with the word fluid? What's fluid mean? It actually means either a liquid or it just means not a solid. In this case, it's a liquid. So maybe I'll just say liquid. Why say fluid? Just because that's what my cheat note says? That doesn't matter. The liquid in the cell is called, and half of this word you're going to know and half will be new, but half of it I guarantee you know, which is, does anyone know what you call the liquid part of your blood? Your blood is a liquid, and that's got a bunch of cells and solid stuff in it. It's the cells and stuff that makes it look red, actually. Do you know what you call just the liquid part? You can donate just this part of your blood. I guarantee you've heard the word before. Yeah, say it. Very good. Plasma is a scientific word for the liquid part of something. Does that make sense?
It's pretty cool how it separates as well.
Yeah, if I hope I'll be able to do this again this year. I used to run a science club here every year, and we do different cool labs. But one of the things I did was I had my friend come in who's a nurse and draw blood from me, and then we would actually look at it under the microscope and see my blood cells. And then we would spin it down in the centrifuge in the back, and you could actually see my blood separated into plasma, red cells, and white cells.
I did that when I was a kid, just not with the whole like spinny thing.
Yeah. So the liquid in the cell is called plasma, but it's not just called plasma. They put it together with another prefix. We call it cytoplasm. For some reason, they took the A off. I don't really understand that. But plasm just comes from plasma, which means the liquid part of something. So in science, plasma just means the liquid part. And then this prefix will come up a lot in bio. Cyto means cell. So anytime you see the prefix cyto, it just means cell. So listen.
It sounds better than cellular plasm.
Yeah. Well, but here's the thing, is that all these words come from the Latin. Early science was done in Latin, because that's in a traditional English education, everyone learned Latin. And so if you spoke Latin, none of these words would sound fancy. Literally, if you spoke Latin, what do we call the stuff inside the cell? The cell liquid. That does not sound fancy, right? What do you call the surrounding part of the cell? The cell surrounding part. That's what membrane means, right? None of these words sound fancy. They sound fancy to you because they come from a language you don't speak, right? But the truth is they're actually just really descriptive. They just say what things are. Does that make sense? And once you get a little less scared of the language in science and you hear it enough, you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. And that's like anything, right? You get really into anything, you start to use the words people use, right? Like I remember my son, like, got like really into skateboarding, and, when he was like 10, and like all of a sudden you're hearing all these words for like skateboarding things. And I'm like, yeah, I remember that from when I was a kid. And then like, if you ever have somebody who gets really into playing guitar, all of a sudden they're using all these words that like you've never heard before, but like you get used to them. So at its most basic, this is what the cell looks like. It's got this surrounding area, and then it's got liquid inside called the cytoplasm. And the cytoplasm is just water with all kinds of things dissolved in it. And it's different depending on the type of cell. What are some of the things that could be dissolved? Gases, all right? You could have oxygen in the cytoplasm, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, so on and so forth. You could have sugars and nutrients and all kinds of other stuff. Does that make sense? I'll give you a minute to write that. I'm trying not to rush. I get excited about this stuff because I think it's really exciting, and then I go too fast, and then people don't get it down, and then they're not excited because they're just confused by it.
Yeah, because then you yell at us for not having it done.
I yell. I'm a big yeller. Sometimes I throw things. I like stomp on things. Put kids in headlocks. Pull their hair. Noogie them.
Fallen sinks.
Give them swirlies.
And in grade 8, my one
Get
teacher
expelled.
got so mad she took
I can't get expelled. I can get fired. Expelled would imply I'm a student. I've already graduated.
that word even in grade 8? My teacher
Which one?
got so
Gases.
mad at us that she took the eraser to the whiteboard and she threw it at the computer.
Yeah, it sounds like you guys were probably being monsters. Were you being monsters? Be honest.
No.
I'll tell you this. There's not enough money in the world. If somebody came to me tomorrow and said, we will triple your pay, you can make 3 times as much money, go teach grade 7, I'd be like, I'm so good. Nope. No, thank you.
Actually, why did
Yeah, exactly. Right? Question that contains its own reply, Aiden Anderson. I can't. Oh, can you imagine? Like when I die and go to hell, and let's face it,
Probably killed a student.
probably be a grade 7 teacher for all eternity. Okay, so now we're going to kind of build on this model. So there's the cell. It's basically a water balloon with water inside, and that water's got some stuff dissolved in it. But like, okay, but that's not doing anything. Like, I've made a lot of water balloons in my life, and none of them have, what do the living things do? None of my water balloons have ever used energy, consumed oxygen and other nutrients, had a life cycle, reproduced, and contained DNA that then give birth to like little baby balloons that are just like them. Right? None of my balloons have ever done that. So what else is going on in the cell? And that's what we're going to say here, which is that it also contains all of the complex molecules that do things in the cell.
Your handwriting's interesting sometimes.
I do my best. It's the best I can do.
I said sometimes.
Yeah. And what are some of the things that get done? I mean, you've probably heard of some of these things, but we have proteins, which are basically like molecular machines. These can actually move around and do things. Again, if you take grade 11 biology, you'll learn all about proteins. But I mean, the most common example, if you want to eat a lot of protein, what do you eat? Meat. Because really, when we eat meat, what part of an animal are we eating? Yeah, but what is the meat? Like the muscles. And the reason that contains a lot of protein is because anything that is a machine in the cell, anything that has to move, is made of protein, and your muscles are cells that have one job, which is to move. So the cells in your muscle are full of massive amounts of protein because they're full of these machines whose job is to have a little electrical signal applied to them and go whoop and shorten up. And then when that electrical signal gets turned off, they loosen back up again. And you've got two of them always, right? Every joint in your body has one muscle whose job is to pull it one way. So when you flex, your bicep, right? And then when you release, your tricep pulls and your bicep loosens, right? Otherwise, you'd be able to flex, but then it would just fall down. But it doesn't just fall down, right? Like when you unflex, it calmly moves down. And that's because as your bicep releases, your tricep engages. I can barely feel my tricep because I'm weak, but if you exercise, you might be able to feel that thing real good. So that's an example. There's proteins in there. They're like molecular machines. There's carbohydrates. We don't need to talk about those too much, but they can be for energy storage. They can be for structure, things like that. There's fats and lipids. There's DNA. Does anyone know what DNA is? DNA is a molecule that is like what we call our genetic information. What's genetic information?
Stuff passed down.
Yeah, specifically what?
Warfare,
Yeah,
stuff like with mental or like physical health.
absolutely. And those are very specific things, but even more broadly, if you have kids, they're probably going to have two eyes. Most kids do. And a nose and two ears. They're probably going to have two hands and two arms and two legs. And they're probably going to have hands at the ends of their arms. They're probably going to have 5 fingers on their hands. So some kids have 6. Yeah, no, there are. But here's the deal. Your DNA, we're going to talk about this one specifically for a moment. We're not going to talk about all these right now because I like to go slow and I like to not just be like, here's a bunch of definitions, memorize them. But rather, I like to talk and make sure you kind of understand how these things work. So the DNA is a molecule that contains coded instructions for how to build a cell and run a cell. How to build and run, I'm going to say and operate, that particular cell. It's the blueprint. And do you know what a blueprint is? Like, is that term familiar? Like, what is a blueprint? Not speaking cells here, like just in our day-to-day lives. Yeah.
It's basically a paper that tells you how big something is.
How big it is, yeah. Who would use the blueprint for a building? That's right. It's a paper that says how to build something.
It's an IKEA instruction sheet.
That's right.
Except less complex.
I like that. That's right. So your cell has a blueprint that says how to build it and how to run it. And you could almost think, another way to think of it is like the instruction manual. It's like 50% blueprint, 50% instruction manual. Does that make sense? And that's, in some ways, the most important thing of a cell. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Do you have like
Yes, unless he stole it back. Did he? Oh, it's right here. Here, you can use it right here. Oh, whoa.
I'm gonna just move over there, so I'm like out of the way.
Oh, sure. Yeah, you bet. Whoa.
How do you undo it?
I have no idea. Like that. There we go.
Thank
You're welcome. So you can imagine when whether it's a human or whether it's a bacterium or whether it's a flower. Oh, Haley, I know I'm boring, but here, pretend to pay attention to me for like 5 more minutes and you'll be good. When cells reproduce, or when whole organisms reproduce, they have to give the new cell, they have to give the new offspring their own blueprint. Does that make sense? Now, more complex organisms reproduce sexually, right? Which means they actually do an interesting thing where they have to sort of take, mom's blueprint and dad's blueprint and combine them to make a new blueprint that's a combination of the two. Simple cells, we're going to talk about this year, we're going to stick with simple ones.
More of my dad.
Simple cells actually reproduce, and their offspring are clones. What's it mean to be a clone? Yeah, the exact same duplicate. So like when a bacterium reproduces, it does so asexually. It literally just makes a perfect copy of itself. We do not do that. It'd be weird, right? It'd be weird if like you went to someone's house and like they had 3 kids and all 3 kids were just them exactly. That'd be strange. Well, no, but I mean 3 copies of like the parent. Yeah. So I want to focus on the DNA just for a minute. In simple cells, so let's talk DNA. And I'm going to put a /RNA. You don't need to know about the difference right now. Simple cells use a molecule called RNA. More advanced ones use DNA. So DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Don't worry about it. I'm just going to put it there so I can say I told you.
I will never write that down.
Write it. It's good for you. Deoxy just means that it's got 1 less oxygen than this molecule would normally have.
Please do not put that on the bill.
Don't worry about it. Ribo. Deoxyribo, comes from a sugar called deoxyribose. So it actually has, it's based around a sugar molecule. Isn't that kind of interesting? Your DNA, your genetic information, is actually stored in a big long chain of sugar. Isn't that kind of weird to think about? Yeah, your blueprint is a bunch of sugar molecules stuck to a bunch of acid molecules. Interesting. Not super important that you know that. But it's a big long chain. And there's actually 4 possible versions of this DNA molecule. So it's a big chain of basically of 4 versions. You don't, and again, this is actually not even in your curriculum, but I think it's helpful to kind of explain it. So there's actually 4 DNA molecules. And one is called adenine, one's called thymine, one's called cytosine, one's called guanine. You don't need to know that. But these are 4 small variations, small changes on the same molecule. And the result is that the order these are put in serves as a written code. Now, DNA has a famous shape. Does anyone know what a DNA molecule looks like? It was discovered in the 60s. It's got a really neat shape.
It has it looks like a ladder, but
Yeah.
kind of like melted.
That's right. It's this really cool thing where it's got like two edges like this, and it's this kind of double shape that they call a double helix. I'm terrible at drawing it. I'm bad at art. I'm basically bad at anything that involves like hand-eye coordination. I'm a very coordinated person.
Want to go play football?
No. I mean, I love playing football, but I'm not good at it. And so if you zoom in on this, what you actually see, that's plenty zoomed in. We're going to zoom in just a little bit. And what you see is that it actually basically goes like this. The red part here, there's 4 different versions. And so it might go like A, T, T, C, G, T, ... And this, the order of these form literally words. They form words that serve as instructions. Again, if you take grade 11 biology or grade 12 biology, we talk about specifically how that works. But all of your genes, if you actually go look up a human gene, or like if you were watching the news like when COVID, first came out, but like the SARS-CoV-2 virus, right? That's the virus that causes COVID-19. How it actually works. Do you know how a virus works? I always think it's crazy. I think it's such a failure of public education and like the way we handled this pandemic that like we went through a 3-year pandemic, and I think if you went on the street with a camera and asked people to explain to you how viruses work, most people wouldn't be able to tell you. Does anyone know? Yeah. I'll give me just a minute, and I'll say yes. But yeah, this is actually a good thing to know. Do you know what a virus does? You don't have to draw this. Okay, don't draw this. But here's one of your cells. Let me just get through this here just so I go. Here's one of your cells, and you've got your DNA here, all right? And you've got a lot of DNA. A lot of DNA. You actually have 2 meters of DNA in every single cell, which is crazy because you have billions of cells, which means you have enough DNA literally to get you out of the solar system if you strung it together. And it's all curled up. It's all coiled up inside your cells.
Why can't it go into my height?
Because it takes a lot, right? It takes a lot of information. And a virus comes along, and the SARS virus kind of looks like this. It's got little like nubby things sticking out, and it's got a little bit more DNA inside of it. And you know what it does?
It attacks.
It latches onto you, and then it takes its DNA and puts it inside you, and that gets added to your DNA. And you know what's on that DNA? This is so sinister. Viruses are so evil. Do you know what that little piece of DNA, because again, DNA is a code, it's a blueprint, right? Do you know what that blueprint is for?
Destruction.
Not kind of, but do you know why specifically what it codes for? Imagine this. Imagine you wanted to, I always think about, imagine if you owned a company. Say you owned a company, you're like, I want to make cars. And most people would be like, well, I guess we got to build a factory. A virus says, what if I took my blueprints, went down to the GM plant and replaced all their blueprints with my blueprints, and then all of a sudden that factory just made my cars for me, and then I went and stole them all.
It's like a ghost.
Believe it or not, when that virus puts that in, this little bit of DNA says how to make a virus, specifically this virus. It puts the blueprint of how to make itself into your cell and turns your cells into factories making more viruses. And then when it makes enough of them, hundreds of thousands of them, they get so big that they split the cell right open. And then you know what every one of those can do? Go attach themselves to another cell and get that cell to make thousands more viruses. And then it does that in your respiratory pathway, which means that all the cells in your respiratory pathway start breaking open with viruses, which is why you get a sore throat. You're getting a sore throat because literally the lining of your throat is dying as these viruses are breaking those cells open. But that means your throat is also now full of billions of viruses. And then you cough and they shoot out in the air. And then I breathe them in and they latch onto one of my cells. And then you know what they do? They go inside, they put their DNA in, and then say, hey, Joe's cell, guess what you are now? A virus factory. And my cells start doing it.
Is that why there's side effects for certain things? Because they're recoding your body?
Yeah, well, those cells all die. In fact, we'll talk about that in a minute. Your body, when one of your cells gets invaded by a virus, your body has designed your cells, because you have lots of them, you have lots and lots and lots of cells. Your cells are supposed to kill themselves and take the virus with it. That's their job, to stop from spreading. And if we teach our body what a virus looks like, our immune system, we do that either by getting the disease, and after you've gotten a disease and your body's fought it off, next time it's ready. It knows what it looks like, and when it sees one of those cells, your cells will kill themselves real quick and take them with it. The other way, we can train our body by giving it a vaccine, and that's what vaccines are. In the case of a vaccine, the current vaccine actually just takes this spike that's on the outside of the SARS virus, which is not the dangerous part of it, it's just part of its capsule, and it teaches your body what that looks like, so that when your body sees that, it tries to kill it. And it's not effective enough to completely stop you from getting COVID, but it gets your body to fight it off much quicker, which means you're much less likely to get a severe case. You're much less likely to be really infectious and make other people sick. Anyway, we'll get to that at a later date. We will talk about vaccines, but that's what your DNA is. It's a written instruction. Now, very simple cells, like bacteria, just have the DNA in the cytoplasm. And remind me, what's the cytoplasm?
Cellular plasma.
Yeah, which just means cell liquid. In other words, for a simple, a simple cell like a bacteria, what color did I use for the nucleus? Or for the nucleus, for the membrane? I think I used purple. Yeah. For a simple cell, we have, here's the cell. It's full of fluid called cytoplasm. Yeah, yes, sorry. Again, I get excited. Yeah, be quick. And it just has its DNA just kind of sitting loosely in the cell. And it could be RNA, which is just a simpler version of it. Oh. What do we call this thing that surrounds the cell and keeps it safe? Yeah, the cell membrane. Very good. Now, the danger here is that this is pretty exposed. In fact, bacteria, their DNA is so exposed that it gets damaged all the time, which is why bacteria are constantly changing on us. Very, very quickly. Same with viruses. Their DNA is just loose and exposed like this, and it can get damaged by viruses, by other bacteria, by sunlight, by chemicals. It's just sitting there in the cell, all exposed. Does that make sense? Yeah, the cell membrane provides some protection, but the cell constantly has to bring things in and out of the membrane. And when your DNA is just sitting there, it's very exposed. It's very in danger. Does that make sense? Now, for something that is only one cell big and only lives for a couple days anyway, you know, some bacteria live for weeks and months and years, but some just live for a day or two. That might not be so important. But your DNA has to last how long? 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years, 110 years? My plan is to live thousands of years. Have I talked about this? My plan is to train students to be good scientists so one day they can take my brain out of my head, put it in a jar, and give me robot spider legs. Because I'm afraid of dying. But that's a different discussion. Why am I recording this? Honestly. Anyway, I'm such an embarrassment. Yes. Yeah, no, terrified. Anyway, that's a different, my existential dread is a different conversation. But the point being, my DNA has to last hundreds of thousands of years. We need to protect it. So if you want to protect it, and the cell does, your cells have an added layer of protection for your DNA. And you might know this. In your cells, where is the DNA? It's not just sitting in the cytoplasm. There's... in complex cells, like you can grab another piece of paper. Like humans and carrots and things like that, the DNA has its own protective membrane. To keep it safe and separate from the rest of the cell. Do you know what we call this? I'll draw a picture. So for you, you've got your cell membrane, and it's full of cytoplasm, and there's lots of other stuff in there. All right, there's all kinds of things floating around in the nucleus. In fact, we haven't been drawing that, but if you look here, there's things all over the place. Oh, there's stuff, there's things, and oh, there's some stuff, and there's some proteins that are doing things, and oh, here's a big protein, and all kinds of stuff around just doing things. And that's true here too, but we want to keep the DNA safe, so it gets its own membrane. And it's usually, roughly in the middle of the cell. There's a second membrane. And the only thing inside that membrane, a bit of a lie, but just to keep it simpler, is our DNA. And in humans, our DNA tends to, it's not all one big loop because we just have too much of it. Does that make sense? For a bacterium, they can have just one single piece of DNA because they're pretty simple cells, but you are not simple. So we have lots and lots and lots of pieces of DNA. In fact, we have 46 of them. Do you know what they're called? Your DNA is stored in 46. I bet you've heard the word. We'll talk about it in a minute. So this is the cell membrane. This is the cytoplasm. And then this whole structure here on the inside, we call that and you've seen this word before because in science this just means the thing in the middle. What's the thing in the middle of the cell called? Or the thing in the middle of the atom called? Where the protons and the neutrons are? The nucleus. Well, this is the cell's nucleus, which is just called because every complex cell has one. So in your body, your muscle cells have a nucleus because what do your muscle cells need? They need the blueprint. They need the DNA, right? And your brain cells have a nucleus because what does your brain cells need? They need the blueprint. Sorry?
What's up the P? Underneath the P of proton, it's say T separate.
Oh, that's an and. Sorry, I just did a plus sign. Can I do the old ampersand? There we go. All right, now the membrane on the nucleus has a very clever name. Instead of calling it the cell membrane, we call it the nuclear membrane. Which makes sense. It's the membrane that's around the nucleus. Does that make sense? And then this is the DNA. And each strand of DNA is called a chromosome. Have you heard that before? That you have 46 chromosomes? Do you know that you have 46 chromosomes? You don't really need to know that for this course, but you have 46 chromosomes. How many of them did you get from your mom, your biological mother? Yeah, 23. How many did you get from your biological father? The other 23. So you have 46 chromosomes, 23 from your biological mother, 23 from your biological father. And your DNA is a combination of their DNA. And if one day you have kids, you will pass on 23 of your 46 chromosomes to them, and your partner will pass on 23 of their chromosomes. Sorry? Right? It's pretty nuts when you think about it. Like, it's, if you take, in this class, we're not going to talk about how that happens, about how in sexual procreation you get the chromosomes sort of split from mom and split from dad, because it's quite a complicated process. But we're going to learn about how single-celled organisms reproduce in this class. And if you take grade 11 biology, we talk about sort of the sexual reproductive side of it. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I'm fine with that. Yep, I'm fine with that. So cells contain, or can contain, I should say, cells can contain lots of lots of membrane-bound organelles, which, what the heck does that mean? Okay. Organelle is just another way of saying organ. What are the organs in your body? What are your organs? We're going to talk about this later on, but what are some of your organs? Who can name one? Heart, kidney, lungs, liver, intestines, spleen, stomach, appendix, lymph nodes, right? So listen, an organelle, these are just balloons inside a balloon. So, all of the molecules required to do one specific job. Are usually surrounded by a membrane and kept together. Which, if you think about it, makes sense. This is how we do things too. You have a coffee maker, right? Which takes all the stuff you need to make a cup of coffee and puts it in one place, right? You have a phone that has all the stuff needed to be a phone and it's in one place. It would be weird if the phone didn't have a case that kept all the stuff together, right? If your phone was just have you ever taken your phone apart? A phone apart? No one? What is wrong with you people? You have good. Take things apart, guys. Oh my God. When I was your age, anytime my parents bought something new, anytime I buy something new this day, the first thing I do is take it apart. I took this camera apart. This is a very expensive camera. I bought it used. Used, it cost me $1,200. New, they're $3,700. And you know what the first thing I did was? Because I just can't help myself. Oh, took it all apart. Took every screw out, took it apart. And then I was like, oh my God, what if I can't get this back together? Because I had taken 211 screws out. And I took pictures as I went. And that took me 3 weeks to put back together. And I'm like, did I just spend all that money and then immediately break my camera? Yeah. Which I did not. Though I will say, when I was done, there were 2 screws left on my desk. And I was like, so somewhere in here, there's 2 things that should be screwed in that aren't. But whatever. I've had it for 4 years and it's still hanging on.
And I took it apart before I hooked it up.
See, I love this.
Well, she had to go and buy a new one.
That's what I'm saying. But imagine if see this remote control right here? Imagine if it didn't have a plastic case and it was just there's a circuit board and it's over there, there's some wires and there's a button over here and they're just flying over. It'd be crazy, right? Does that make sense? So when we want to make something to do a job, what do? Well, we stick it together and we put it in a case, right? Does that make sense? Well, that's what the cell does. When there's, just one sec, okay? All the molecules required to do one specific job are usually put inside of a membrane.
What? Can I go up there and smack them?
No, it's okay. No smacking.
Punch?
No.
Kick?
So, no, shh. Are put in a membrane and kept together. It just makes sense. And we call these organelles. As we go through this course, we'll talk about a couple of them. Here's what I don't like to do. I think, and I'm not criticizing anyone. I mean, Lord, who am I to criticize anyone? But I think a lot of teachers put a diagram of the cell up and they label all the organelles in it and say, okay, memorize this or learn this. And I just don't think that's useful because to me, the whole point of an organelle is that it's like a tool. An organelle is the cell saying, okay, we need a place to keep our blueprint. And by the way, the nucleus doesn't just have the blueprint, it also has all the tools needed to read the blueprint and all the tools needed to make a copy of the blueprint when the time comes. Does that make sense? And that's the only organelle we're going to talk about today, though we'll talk about other ones going forward. So for example, the nucleus not only contains the DNA, but all the tools to, and here's just a few things that happens in the nucleus. Read the DNA. Repair it. your DNA from time to time does get damaged. And your cell actually has machines in the nucleus that if the DNA gets damaged and it spots it, will repair it. So they can read the DNA, repair it. They can make copies of it. Yeah.
If you want, I can bring in an Xbox controller.
I would love to see that. I took apart.
I put the case back on, but I don't have.
I took one apart and I took out the motors that make like the rumble pack of it. Which, do you know how that works? I have them in the back somewhere. It's so close. It's just a motor. Probably in grade 9 science, you use those motors, right? You know, the little ones where if you hook it up to a battery, it spins. You can put a fan on it. Honestly, all a rumble pack is in there is a motor, and then they put a weight on it so that it spins. That's heavy on one side and light on the other. So when it spins, it shakes. That's it. It's just like an unstable atom. All a rumble pack is a motor with something on it that's lopsided, so that when it spins, it's like your laundry machine. You know, if you're like my idiot children, whom I love, who like can't seem to load the laundry without like putting all the towels on one side and then like socks on the other, so that as soon as it starts going fast, it like shakes its way across the room. Do you guys do that too?
No.
That's just my kids. My kids are not good. I shouldn't complain. My kids do all their own laundry, which is good, but they not good at loading the machine well. That's okay. So the cell has many different organelles. We'll learn about some of them as we go. So the cell has an organelle whose job is to make proteins. The cell has an organelle's job whose job it is to make sugars, if it's the kind of cell that makes sugars. The cell has an organelle whose job it is to break sugars down. The cell has an organelle whose job it is to shorten and expand, if it's a muscle. The cell has an organelle whose job it is to make signals that it can send to other cells. The cell has an organelle whose job it is to read signals from other cells. Does that make sense? And all of these things, we take all the machines needed to do that job, and if you surround them with a membrane, now they won't float away from each other. Does that make sense? They all stay together and they can work together. Whereas if you didn't put a membrane around it, they'd just float around. Very simple cells, like bacteria, have no organelles because they're just small and they just let everything float around. But again, that's a very basic design. So the simplest cells have no organelles, but all complex ones do.
What about people who can't break down the sugars and that?
Well, that means that in their DNA, the instruction that's supposed to build the machines that break down sugars has a mistake in it, or has a different version in it, and that machine doesn't work properly in the cell. Does that make sense?
It's like an error.
Yeah, that's right.
Your cells are really
That looks like a C, but it's supposed to be a bracket. All of their molecules just float in the cytoplasm. Every multicellular organism, every complex thing.
Excuse the interruption, folks. On today's cafeteria menu, we have chicken vegetable soup for $2, assorted subs and sandwiches, salad for $3.75, cookies for $1, and mac and cheese with garlic bread for $5. Thanks for listening. Have a great day, Eagles.